Hello, I'm Jenny Brown and welcome to our weekly buy-to-let mortgage market update. So you may remember a few weeks ago I was really excited because my son had gone back to school and I was glad to be over the homeschooling hideousness. Bad news, he's now back at home. One of the other children in his class have had a positive COVID test. And so we're back to self-isolating and homeschooling for the next week, which is nice. Lender news this week for you. A bit of repricing going on. Vida Home Loans have increased some rates and removed their 2-year fixed 80% loan to value and 85% loan to value products. Vida were fairly unique, particularly in the 85% loan to value space. In fact, they were wholly unique. And so they were getting overrun with business. So to maintain service levels, they've taken the decision to remove some of their products. So good for them for trying to make positive moves to ensure their standard service standards don't fall over. We've also seen foundation home loans increase their rates. Pricing is generally going up by around 0.05% across the range. Now, foundation home loans have had some very competitive pricing, particularly in the specialist end of the market space. Their increase is a shame, but actually they were very competitively priced in the first place, so their products still remain very good. Now, foundation home loans are again a specialist lender. They can lend to limited companies and to individuals. They don't mind how many properties you have in the background. They will lend up to age 80 at the start of application. The mortgage needs to be paid off by the age of 85. So if you're 80 and applying for a mortgage, essentially you can have a 5-year term with foundation home loans. Some other neat bits of criteria for you. They can lend on studio flats. They're very comfortable with flats over commercial, and also flats with deck access, which can be a little bit contentious. And the other thing about foundation that I really like is they don't have a minimum income requirement. Now, we've also seen Skipton conversely decrease their rates by up to 0.57% across their buy-to-let range. Now, Skipton are very opposite to foundation home loans in terms of the kind of borrowers they're looking for. So they're looking for those landlords with no more than 10 properties in the background, and it doesn't matter whether the properties are mortgaged or mortgage-free. It could be no more than 10 properties in the background. Again, they can lend to you up to the age of 80 at application, which is really good. They have an income requirement of £20,000 a year, just to know that. And again, they can consider some of the less popular types of properties when it comes to lending. So ex-local authority flats, new builds and studios, and also listed buildings. So that's the lender news this week. Fairly quiet in terms of changes there, but actually, that's not such a bad thing given what we went through at the start of lockdown. A fair amount of housing market news for you this week. So first of all, Knight Frank have published some analysis, which essentially is telling us that asking prices for properties in the Yorkshire and Humber have risen more than any other region in England and Wales since the market reopened in May. The data, which looks at the average asking price for 2-bedroom flats and 3-bedroom houses across the regions, is suggesting that buyers are now prepared to go further afield to strike a better balance between work and life. The average asking price for a 2-bedroom flat in Yorkshire rose 10% to £153,354. Conversely, asking prices for 2-bedroom flats in London, for example, fell 4% over the same period. Now, what they've gone on to say is that a change in asking price does not necessarily show that underlying prices have actually moved, speaking more generally. But Knight Frank says that the fact that the Yorkshire tops the table for flats and houses by such a clear margin is a trend really worth noting. We've also had some data published by our friends at Nationwide with their house price index. The full house price index report has now been made available. And what they have said that the annual house price growth has gathered momentum in September as the housing market continues on with its recovery. Some key headlines for you. The annual house price growth picked up to 5% in September, which is the highest rate since September 2016. Prices rose 0.9% month on month after taking into account seasonal factors, and most regions saw a pickup in house price growth rates in Q3. Highest areas of house price growth reported in the last quarter were the Southwest, Outer Metropolitan, and the slowest areas were Scotland and Northern Ireland. Now, reading through the report, one of the things that I picked out, which I thought would be interesting for those people who might be thinking about investing at the moment, is really trends around people's buying decisions. So what they have said is that around 10% of those surveyed in September said they were in the process of moving as a result of the pandemic, with a further 18% considering a move for the same reason. The pattern was evident across the country, especially in London, and of those moving or considering a move, around a third, so 35%, were looking to move to a different area, while nearly 30% were doing so to access a garden or an outdoor space more easily. So again, really just coming back to this fact that people's desires to live in, at the moment, in really urban areas is waning, and people are looking to move out to more suburban areas where there's green spaces around them. Also, this week, we've seen Savills present some data or forecasting looking forwards, actually, which is also interesting because a lot of this information is talking about the now and past. So what Savills have done is predict that the UK housing market will actually remain buoyant, with prices set to rise by an average of 20.4% by 2024. And that's despite the current COVID-19 pandemic, which has really heightened uncertainty over the economy, employment, and of course, finances. They've said the average property price is expected to increase 4% this year by then stabilising in 2021. And according to their research, prices in the northwest will rise the fastest compared to other regions, interestingly followed by Scotland and Yorkshire and the Humber. And the reason I say interestingly is linking back to what I was just saying previously. Whilst the Yorkshire and the Humber are obviously doing incredibly well, Scotland is one of the areas which has actually seen the lowest house price movement. So yeah, I always just find it really interesting to see different commentators' thoughts on the market and actually how these do differ. But obviously there are also some real trends within all of that. Moving on to some wider housing news, in particular house building. So Robert Jenrick has announced that new homes delivered through permitted development rights will now have to meet minimum space standards. Permitted development homes make a really important contribution to delivering the housing the country needs by making effective use of existing buildings, allowing them to be changed into homes without the need to go through a full planning approval. So these homes are instead consented through a lighter touch prior approval process, which essentially speeds up the delivery of these new homes. And actually, in the last 4 years, there have been 60,000 homes delivered via permitted development. So the measures announced will mean that all new homes in England delivered through these rights in the future will have to meet what's going to be called the nationally described space standard. The space standard begins at 37 metres square of floor space for a new one-bedroom flat with a shower room, and that is 39 square metres of floor space if it's actually got a full bathroom within it. And this will ensure that the property has a proper living space for a single occupier. Now, what they're saying is that while homes delivered through permitted development rights have little difference in quality compared to the homes following a planning application, there have been a minority of developers who have been delivering small homes without any real justification. So the changes announced by Robert Jenrick essentially will look to put an end to that. The change builds on reforms introduced by the government last summer to ensure that all new homes delivered through permitted development will provide adequate natural light. So for those of you who are planning on doing some PD works, this is just really important to know about. We are seeing a large number of clients who are using permitted development to do renovations and builds. So it's clearly a really great thing that we have access to there. So it's just worth knowing some new rules are going to be coming into play. Now this week I'm going to be just talking to you about refurbishment projects that people are taking on. As I just mentioned, we're seeing lots of clients who are buying either empty commercial spaces and changing them into residential, or likewise people who are just doing some cosmetic renovations on properties, or indeed actually doing some kind of building works to increase the space of the property, the floor space. So there's lots of different types of projects of this nature. And how we fund these types of projects is it's a little bit complicated actually, because there's lots of variables here. So essentially, when someone comes to us and wants to do just a really straightforward refurbishment. So I've got a house, I'm just looking to refurbish it, make it really nice inside, and then either sell or rent it out. These are relatively simple to finance. We'd normally look to mortgage these using a bridging loan or refurbishment loan. Refurb loans are essentially bridging loans. People like to give these slightly different names to things. I think a refurbishment loan is probably more palatable to some people than the word bridging loan, because bridging loans have historically had some fairly bad connotations attached to them. What I would also say is that bridging loans are no longer, I don't know, people sort of perceive it as one guy with some pit bulls coming around your house, and that kind of stuff. It's not like that. It's a very professional part of the market now. Some of the larger, even buy-to-let lenders, for example, Precise Mortgages offer bridging finance. So it's a very kind of professional product these days. But essentially, if someone came to us and said, I'm buying a property, I can't rent it out at the moment, or another one that we see is the property actually doesn't meet the EPC requirements, we would need to put the property onto a bridging finance, refurbishment loan, short-term finance, whatever name it is you want to give it. So they can acquire the property, get the works done, and then once the property is ready to be let, the works are finished, then we can move the mortgage onto a more traditional buy-to-let mortgage, or indeed you can sell. Now, the things we always get asked with regards to these is if I were to refurbish the property and within, say, 2 months, can I remortgage within that period of time? Or have I got to wait for 6 months to be able to put it onto a traditional mortgage? And the answer to that is that actually, yes, there are plenty of lenders who will remortgage within the first 6 months of ownership. Particularly, lenders are keen to do this if you have done works to the property and improved it. It's not for every lender by any stretch of the imagination, but there are lots of options for you there. And I think it's fair to say that because bridging finance is, compared to the cost of mortgage borrowing, quite expensive, people are always very keen to exit the bridging finance as quickly as possible. So yeah, being able to refinance within the first 6 months is actually a really good benefit to you if your project is going to be completed within that period of time. Now, in terms of pricing and parameters around bridging finance, look, if it's a really light refurbishment, lenders are able to go up to 75% loan to value of purchase price. We can then remortgage against 75, even 80% of the new value of the property once the works are done. Pricing on bridging finance, it starts at around 0.55% per month, and it really does go up from there. I think if you were really, really unfortunate and struggled to find a home, the kind of top level of bridging finance you would pay would be around 1.5% a month. But that would be very, very unusual. Bridging finance does not have normally any early repayment charges, so you can exit onto a traditional mortgage as soon as the works are done. So that's the really straightforward cosmetic type projects. Now, if we've got someone who is buying something where they're going to do something a little bit more involved, a bit more heavy, as it were. So heavy refurbishments are generally where there is any kind of planning permission, change of use, any structural works where the cost of the works is going to be in excess of around 25% of the property value. In this situation, again, the way we would finance these is exactly the same as for a lighter refurbishment. But the key is that the pricing will move up slightly because it's a higher risk deal. And so you will find that, again, you can get 75% loan to value on bridging finance, but the pricing just goes up. I think with these larger projects as well, the lenders are going to be slightly more cautious. There's more room for error. So they're going to be more interested in their borrower's CV and experience. It would be unusual for someone who's never done a refurbishment before to buy a disused office and try and convert it into flats. That would be a fairly large task for someone to take on as a first timer. So I think experience definitely becomes more relevant at this point. Now, the last thing that we often see is people who are buying something a little bit more speculatively, so a commercial property, which they intend to convert into residential, but there is no change of use in place. Now, with these, the lenders are going to be much more cautious around them. For example, if I was buying a empty pub, and I wanted to convert it into flats, which again, we've seen lots of people doing, is possible. But if change of use was not granted by the council, then our borrower and therefore our lender is left with an empty pub. So the risk is perceived as being much greater with these. So again, we can arrange a loan to acquire the property. This would then become a commercial bridging loan, which again is perceived as more risky. I think you would expect loan to values to be scaled down to between 65 and 70% at this point, possibly even slightly lower. It really would depend on what kind of property it is in terms of the current classification for usage. But yeah, and again, then the bridging loan would be used to cover the period of time while you do the conversion works. Then we'd look to exit onto a traditional mortgage thereafter. Beyond this, really, we're going into real development finance, which is a different whole video all by itself. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. In terms of one of the questions we get asked often actually is, can I borrow the cost of the money to do the works to the property? So rather than just being helped out with the cost of buying the asset, will the lender actually advance money to help me with the cost of the works? And in the main, the answer is generally no to this. However, there are some lenders who are able to offer up some kind of assistance with the cost of works. Now, from these guys' perspective, what they're going to be doing is looking at the end value of the property, and essentially their exposure, their loan to value on the debt as a whole would be limited to a percentage of the end value of the property. So that again is a little bit more along the development finance end of the market, but just know that for the lighter refurbishment projects, there are lenders who are able to potentially assist with upfront costs towards the development or refurbishment work costs. Yes, so I hope that helps. That's it in a very quick nutshell. I think with all of these projects, they're all individual, they're all very different from each other. And the most appropriate way to finance these actually is fairly bespoke. So if you do have one of these that you're considering, absolutely the best thing to do is to get in touch with us and we can chat through the project and then come back with a recommendation on the most appropriate course of finance. That's everything from me this week. Thank you, as always, for your time. We do appreciate you joining us and having a listen to our update. And as always, we have lots of consultants who are very willing to take your call and have a conversation with you about your requirements, 0345 345 6788. Alternately, our website is there for you to have a look at, mortgagesforbusiness.co.uk. Wish me luck with the homeschooling, and I will see you next week.